The city of Mecca, the holiest site in Islam, has always been more than a spiritual center. Its control symbolizes political legitimacy and religious authority in the Islamic world. At the dawn of the 19th century, a dramatic struggle unfolded over this sacred city between the Ottoman Empire and the First Saudi state, driven by a revolutionary radical reformist ideology. It was a battle for not only territory, but also for the soul of Islam itself. At the turn of the 19th century, the sacred city of Mecca, the heart of the Islamic world, became a battleground in a dramatic struggle between the Ottoman Empire, the traditional custodians of Sunni Islam, and the rising Saudi-Wahabi alliance, which sought to purify Islam through its strict interpretation of the faith. This clash of ideologies culminated in the Saudis' audacious conquest of Mecca and the Ottomans' determined efforts to reclaim it. After defeating the Mamluks, the Ottomans took over the role of caliphs and protectors of the holy sites of Mecca and Medina in the early 16th century. With the conquest of Mecca, Sultan Selim I and subsequent Ottoman sultans assumed the formal custodianship of the Kaaba and the administration of Mecca and its holy sites. This symbolic role reinforced Ottoman legitimacy as the leaders of the Muslim world. In their early history, in the 14th to 15th centuries, the Ottoman rulers primarily used the title Sultan, which indicated temporal authority as military and political leaders of their expanding empire. Their legitimacy was rooted in their status as Ghazis, warriors for Islam, and defenders of Sunni Islam, rather than in claiming to be the caliphs of the entire Muslim world. In 1517 CE, Sultan Selim I defeated the Mamluks in Egypt, incorporating the Hejaz region, including Mecca and Medina, into the Ottoman Empire. This gave the Ottomans control over Islam's holiest sites and the Hajj pilgrimage, a major symbol of Islamic authority. After the conquest, Selim I reportedly received the relics of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, from the last Abbasid Caliph, Al-Mutawakkil III, who had resided in Cairo under Mamluk protection. This event symbolized the transfer of caliphal authority to the Ottoman sultans. With the control of Mecca and Medina, the Ottomans could now claim to be the caliphs of Islam. By claiming the title of caliph, the Ottomans positioned themselves as the leaders of Sunni Islam, inheriting the legacy of the Abbasids. This was especially important given their role as protectors of the holy cities and their rivalry with Shia Safavid Persia. The Ottoman caliphs now held significant religious authority and were regarded as symbolic leaders of Islam. Rather than directly ruling Mecca and Medina through central Ottoman officials, the Ottomans entrusted the Sharifs of Mecca with governance over the region. The Sharifs were granted a degree of autonomy, and their role as religious leaders and custodians of the Kaaba was recognized. The Sharifs of Mecca, as descendants of the Prophet Muhammad through his grandson Hassan, were seen as religious leaders and had been custodians of the Kaaba long before Ottoman rule. The Ottomans recognized the Sharifs' important role in maintaining order and overseeing the Hajj pilgrimage. While the Sharifs were given autonomy over Mecca, the Ottomans maintained suzerainty over the region. The Sultan, as the Caliph, was seen as the ultimate authority, and the Sharifs were expected to acknowledge Ottoman suzerainty. The Ottomans would often send governors or officials to oversee the region, but the day-to-day administration of Mecca was left in the hands of the Sharifs. The Sharifs of Mecca were granted control over religious and administrative matters in Mecca and Medina, including overseeing the Hajj, collecting taxes, and maintaining the religious significance of the city. In return, the Sharifs pledged loyalty to the Ottoman Sultan and recognized his claim to the caliphate. The Sharifs of Mecca had maintained their rule over the holy city across various Islamic dynasties, including the Abbasids, Fatimids, Ayyubids, Mamluks, and now Ottomans. The Sharifs of Mecca had unmatched religious authority in the Islamic world. Their lineage made them suitable custodians of Mecca, a role highly respected by all Muslim rulers, regardless of sect or dynasty. Dynasties like the Fatimids, Ayyubids, Mamluks and Ottomans recognized the Sharif's role as critical to maintaining the sanctity of Islam's holiest city and ensuring the smooth functioning of the Hajj. The Sharifs displayed remarkable political adaptability, aligning themselves with whichever dynasty or empire held overarching power at the time. They pledged nominal allegiance to the ruling dynasties while retaining significant local autonomy. In return, they often received financial support, titles, and military backing. Mecca's location in the remote Hijaz region, far from the central power bases of Baghdad, Cairo, Damascus, or Istanbul, made it difficult for distant empires to impose direct rule. Empires found it more practical to rely on the Sharifs as local rulers rather than attempting to govern Mecca themselves. The Sharifs of Mecca skillfully mediated between the tribes of the Hijaz and the ruling empires, maintaining order in the region. The Sharifs rarely overstepped their role or challenged the overarching authority of the ruling dynasties, ensuring they were seen as allies rather than threats. Even during periods of dynastic conflict, the Sharifs managed to preserve their position by avoiding overt involvement. However, by the early 18th century, the Arabian Peninsula had become a land of tribal divisions, political fragmentation, and religious pluralism. The Ottomans, who ruled much of the Muslim world, had limited influence over the Arabian interior and did not pay much attention to it. The Ottomans, like all previous caliphates and dynasties, were more interested in the Hijaz region. The rise of the Saudi Wahhabi movement, led by Muhammad ibn Saud and Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, brought about a powerful challenge to the Sharifs of Mecca and the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, the Ottomans had maintained their claim to the holy cities of the Hejaz, using the Sharifs as their appointed rulers. But the puritanical reforms of the Wahhabis threatened both their political and religious authority. Born in 1703, Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab was a scholar from the town of Uyayna in central Arabia. Influenced by a deep study of Islamic texts, he grew increasingly concerned about what he saw as widespread innovations, bid'ah, superstitions and polytheistic practices among Muslims. For Ibn Abd al-Wahhab, the only true Islam was the one practiced by the Salaf, the early generations of Muslims, the companions of the Prophet Muhammad and their followers. His message was radical: return to the purity of early Islam, rejecting practices like tomb veneration, saint worship, and the celebration of certain religious festivals that he considered innovations. This call for religious purification began to attract a following. In the 1740s, Ibn Abd al-Wahhab's growing influence reached Muhammad ibn Saud, the leader of the Al-Saud clan in the town of Diriyah near Riyadh. At the time, the Al-Saud were a small but ambitious tribe looking to expand their influence in Arabia. In 1744, a pivotal moment occurred. Ibn Saud recognized the potential power of Ibn Abd al-Wahhab's reformist ideas and offered him military protection in exchange for religious legitimacy. Together, they formed an alliance, a partnership that would shape the future of the Arabian Peninsula. The political and religious were now united. With the backing of Ibn Abd al-Wahhab's religious ideology, Ibn Saud began a series of military campaigns to spread the new Wahhabi doctrine across Arabia. Towns and tribes were either conquered or coerced into accepting the strict teachings of Wahhabism. This expansion brought with it a new vision of Islam, a vision that sought to purify the faith and remove centuries of innovation. By promoting themselves as reformers, returning Islam to its pure form, the leadership gained widespread loyalty among Arabian tribes who shared or accepted these beliefs. The political and military leadership of Muhammad ibn Saud, combined with the religious authority of Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahhab, created a powerful partnership. The Saudi Wahhabi movement rapidly gained momentum, conquering vast territories in Central Arabia. By the late 18th century, they controlled Najd and much of the Arabian Peninsula. Their forces were united by a religious zeal that aimed to purge Islam of practices they deemed deviant. The first Saudi state was centered in Diriyah, located in the heart of the Najd region, far from Ottoman administrative centers. This geographical isolation made it difficult for external powers to intervene effectively. The Saudis leveraged traditional Arabian tribal warfare tactics, such as swift raids and desert mobility, which were well suited to the terrain and difficult for conventional Ottoman forces to counter. The idea of religiously mandated jihad provided both moral justification and motivation for warriors, uniting them in purpose and ensuring loyalty to the cause. The Saudis allowed tribal leaders to retain some degree of autonomy in exchange for loyalty and adherence to Wahhabi principles, reducing resistance and enabling rapid expansion. The Saudis implemented a system of zakat, Islamic tax collection, ensuring a steady flow of resources while maintaining religious legitimacy. They also appropriated wealth from conquered regions, including Shiite holy sites like Kaaba, further fueling their war efforts. Leaders like Muhammad ibn Saud and his successor Abdulaziz ibn Muhammad were charismatic, capable, and adept at both governance and military campaigns. Their leadership inspired loyalty and maintained cohesion in the rapidly expanding state. In 1802, Saudi forces shocked the Muslim world by sacking Kaaba, a Shia holy city in modern-day Iraq. It was under the Ottoman rule. The Wahhabis desecrated the shrine of Imam Hussein and killed thousands, signaling their willingness to use brutal force to assert their ideology. This act set the stage for their next target, Mecca. The Saudi Wahhabi forces turned their attention to the holy cities. The Saudi alliance with Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab presented a significant challenge to both the Sharifs of Mecca and the Ottoman Sultan. The Sharifs were seen as the key custodians of Islamic religious authority in the Hejaz, particularly over the Hajj pilgrimage and the Kaaba. The rise of the Saudi Wahhabi alliance posed a direct threat to their dominance. The Wahhabi movement emphasized a return to what it considered the purest form of Islam, rejecting practices like tomb veneration, saint worship, and the celebration of religious festivals that the Sharifs of Mecca allowed. This was seen as a direct challenge to the Sharif's religious authority, which had allowed such practices. The rise of the first Saudi state posed a dual threat to the Ottoman Sultan. Politically, it challenged Ottoman control over the Arabian Peninsula, and religiously, it undermined the Ottoman claim to be the caliph and protector of the Islamic holy cities, especially Mecca and Medina. In 1703, under the leadership of Saud ibn Abdul Aziz, the Saudis launched a campaign into the Hejaz. Their forces, driven by religious fervor, swiftly overran the Sharif of Mecca's defenses. Facing internal dissent and unable to muster sufficient resistance, the Sharif surrendered Mecca to the Saudis. The Saudis imposed their strict interpretation of Islam on the city. Shrines, tombs, and other religious monuments they deemed heretical were destroyed, including some linked to the Prophet Muhammad's family. They banned practices such as the veneration of saints and enforced Wahhabi doctrine on the local population. The Saudis destroyed many tombs and shrines around Mecca and Medina, including the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad's family members. They considered these shrines as acts of idol worship. The shrines of Abu Talib, Fatima, and other prominent figures were dismantled and their graves desecrated. Wahhabi ideology viewed the veneration of graves and tombs as sinful, and the Kaaba itself, Being surrounded by these shrines and the practices associated with them was seen as a symbol of the polytheism they opposed. By 1805, the Wahhabis had also taken control of Medina, expelling Ottoman loyalists and enforcing their strict interpretation of Islam. They completed their domination of the Hijaz. They restricted access to the holy cities, particularly for pilgrims from regions loyal to the Ottoman Empire. The loss of Mecca and Medina was a profound humiliation for the Ottoman Sultan Selim III, who was already struggling to maintain control over his empire. He had just regained control of Egypt from Napoleon Bonaparte with the help of the British. He was also involved in other European and Balkan campaigns. Saudi's control of the holy cities undermined his legitimacy in the eyes of the Muslim world. Sultan Selim III was succeeded by Sultan Mahmud II in 1808. The Ottoman Empire viewed the Hejaz as an essential part of its empire, both politically and religiously. The Ottomans held the title of Caliph and saw the control of Mecca and Medina as crucial to their legitimacy as the spiritual leaders of the Muslim world. Sultan Mahmud II decided to reclaim the Hijaz. The Sultan turned to his ambitious vassal in Egypt, Muhammad Ali Pasha. Muhammad Ali, a ruthless and capable ruler, saw this as an opportunity to expand his influence and prove his loyalty to the Sultan. In 1811, Muhammad Ali launched a military expedition against the Saudi forces. Equipped with modern weaponry and European-trained troops, the Egyptian army was far superior to the tribal warriors of the first Saudi state. The Egyptians began their campaign in Hijaz, defeating Saudi garrisons in smaller towns and steadily advancing toward the holy cities. The siege of Mecca was part of Muhammad Ali Pasha's broader campaign to dismantle the first Saudi state. His forces, led by Ibrahim Pasha, advanced into the Hejaz, using modern artillery to bombard the city. For the Saudis, retreat was not an option. They made their stand in the holiest of places, the Haram itself. The Saudis, determined to defend their cause, fortified positions within the Haram. The Kaaba, the symbol of Islamic unity, now stood amidst the chaos of war. For the defenders, this was not just a political struggle, but a religious one, a fight to preserve their vision of Islam. Artillery fire echoed through the sacred precincts, and parts of the Haram sustained damage. The Kaaba stood as a silent witness to the violence. The standoff involved intense fighting, with artillery bombardments from the Ottoman forces and attempts to break the Saudi defenses. The Ottomans, however, had superior military resources, including cannon fire, which gradually breached the outer defenses of the Haram. Despite the fierce fighting, both sides were acutely aware of the religious significance of the Haram and the Kaaba. This created a delicate situation. The Ottomans were keen on avoiding significant damage to the mosque and its structures, as they wanted to restore Mecca's status as the Caliphate's sacred space without desecrating it. Inside the Haram, the Saudis held their ground for as long as they could. They were fiercely loyal to their cause and to the interpretation of Islam that they were defending. The siege lasted for several weeks, but the Saudi forces were ultimately overwhelmed by the superior Ottoman artillery and military tactics. The Kaaba reportedly sustained damage during this period due to stray projectiles or general warfare around Mecca. After intense bombardment and fighting, the Saudi defenders eventually surrendered Mecca to the Ottoman forces. The Ottomans re-established control over the Haram and the Holy City. The Saudis, unable to resist the superior firepower and organization of the Egyptian army, abandoned the city. After taking Mecca, the Egyptians advanced to Medina, which also surrendered without significant resistance. The holy cities were once again under Ottoman protection, reaffirming the Sultan's role as the Caliph. When the Ottoman Empire, led by Muhammad Ali Pasha and his son Ibrahim Pasha, retook Mecca and Medina from the Saudis in 1813 and 1814, they worked to restore the practices and sacred sites to their original form. They made efforts to repair any damage to the holy sites, including the Kaaba, as part of their role as custodians of Islam's sacred places. The Ottomans, after taking control, reversed many of the Wahhabi reforms and restored the traditional Sunni practices that had been part of the region's religious landscape before the Wahhabi conquests. The Wahhabi forces were pushed back into the interior deserts of Arabia. The Ottomans decided to chase them down and launched a decisive campaign against the Saudi heartland in Najd. The final blow to the first Saudi state came in 1818, when Muhammad Ali's forces, now commanded by his son Ibrahim Pasha, laid siege to Diriyah, the Saudi capital. Ibrahim Pasha employed modern artillery and had disciplined troops trained in European-style warfare. The siege of Diriyah lasted several months, with heavy bombardment devastating the city's fortifications. Abdullah ibn Saud was promised safety for his life and that of his family if he surrendered peacefully. However, these assurances applied only to the immediate situation in Diriyah and did not guarantee his fate once in Ottoman custody. The defenders, though determined, were vastly outgunned and outnumbered. After a prolonged and brutal campaign, Diriyah fell and the Saudis were decisively defeated. After months of resistance, Abdullah ibn Saud realized that further defense was futile. In September 1818, he surrendered to Ibrahim Pasha, hoping to negotiate leniency for himself and the people of Diriyah. However, the Egyptians, acting on orders from the Ottoman Sultan Mahmud II, aimed to make an example of the Saudis to discourage further rebellions. After his surrender, Abdullah ibn Saud was taken as a prisoner to Cairo, where he was paraded as a war trophy by Muhammad Ali Pasha. He was then sent to Istanbul, the capital of the Ottoman Empire, for his ultimate fate to be decided by the Sultan. Along with him, other key Saudi leaders and members of the ruling family were also taken as prisoners. Upon his arrival in Istanbul, Abdullah ibn Saud was put on public display, symbolizing the defeat of the Saudi Wahhabi rebellion. The Ottomans intended to demonstrate their supremacy and deter future uprisings. Abdullah was charged with leading a rebellion against the Ottoman state and desecrating Islamic holy sites, such as the destruction of tombs and shrines in Mecca and Medina. In December 1818, Abdullah ibn Saud was executed publicly in Istanbul's main square. The method of execution involved humiliation. Reports suggest he was paraded through the streets and later decapitated. Historical accounts describe his execution as particularly gruesome, with his body displayed as a warning to others who might challenge Ottoman authority. The capture and execution of Abdullah ibn Saud marked the definitive end of the first Saudi state. The Ottomans, with the help of Muhammad Ali Pasha's Egyptian forces, reasserted their authority over the Arabian Peninsula, particularly the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. The Sharifs were entrusted with Mecca once again, and they continued to rule Mecca until 1925, when the Hejaz was annexed by Ibn Saud's second Saudi state and incorporated into the modern Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Their centuries-long rule illustrates the power of religious legitimacy and political adaptability in sustaining authority over one of Islam's most important cities. For the Ottomans, the reconquest of the Hejaz and the reinstatement of the Sharifs represented a return to stability and control over the Islamic world's most sacred sites. However, the Wahhabi influence did not fade. The seeds of resistance planted during this conflict would later grow into the movements that shaped the political landscape of the Arabian Peninsula, eventually leading to the creation of modern Saudi Arabia in the 20th century. But the Saudi-Ottoman struggle was not the last time the Kaaba would face a siege. Nearly 160 years later, a new chapter in Mecca's history would unfold, one that would shake the foundations of the Islamic world in ways few could have anticipated. In 1979, a new threat emerged, this time from within Saudi Arabia itself. A group of insurgents, led by Juhayman al-Otaibi, seized the Grand Mosque in Mecca, holding it hostage for 2 weeks. This bold act was not just a political rebellion, it was a challenge to the very heart of Saudi legitimacy. The Kaaba, the most sacred site in Islam, became the center of a violent standoff between the rebels and the Saudi government. In Part 6, we will uncover the true causes behind the 1979 seizure of the Grand Mosque, examining how Saudi political, religious, and social dynamics came to a dramatic and violent intersection at the holiest site in Islam, which was now controlled by the Saudi kingdom. Stay tuned as we explore the shocking events that reshaped the kingdom and its relationship with the Kaaba, the custodianship of the 2 holy mosques, and the Muslim world at large. If you like this video, please share it and hit the like button. Also, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Until next time, may peace and blessings be with you.